Hello, and welcome to the Natural State Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Gustin. It is my belief that the natural state of any living organism is health, and that our artificial habitat has forced us into having artificial health problems. This show is my attempt to dive deep and learn about using nutrition, sleep, movement, relationships, and more to help you reclaim your natural state of health in a modern world and show you how to thrive in an environment that's stacked against you. If you enjoyed today's show, you can find out more details and information at dranthonygustin.com. Today, I welcome Dr. Molly Maloof to the show, who is not only unconventional in the way she thinks, but also in how she practices. She advises a ton of companies, tech and health-based companies, teaches at Stanford, has courses online, also works with patients remotely. And her and I dive into a lot of topics here. I mean, stuff that's often not covered with health and how people could have health problems if they're missing community and relationships, how psychedelics can help, and how she personally uses those in her practice and her personal experience with that. So we sort of go all over the map here, but I mean, we're pretty aligned on the fact that our system right now is not really set up to help people actually be healthy. So we dig into all of the ways where we could take left turns and find a new way for the healthcare system to work for everybody. So tune into this one, and I hope you enjoy. Before we get to the episode, I wanted to chat about our sponsor, Perfect Keto. Perfect Keto is all about making a ketogenic diet healthy and accessible. Whether you're reading all of our online guides or articles or enjoying Perfect Keto's exogenous ketones or any other keto-friendly products, everything you need to make keto work for you is at perfectketo.com. I know what you're thinking. Hey, aren't you the founder of Perfect Keto? Yep, that's right. And all of my insanely high standards have been put into making each and every product. My background as a functional medicine clinician helps me craft the cleanest and healthiest possible products and the best information about a ketogenic diet. Head on over to perfectketo.com to learn anything you need to know about the ketogenic diet. And if you've never tried any of our products before, feel free to use the code KETOPODCAST for 20% off your first order. With that being said, let's get into the show. Doc, thanks for joining me on the show today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's just something that we've been wanting to do for months. So I'm so happy to be here.
We are. So it's been a very unconventional year. And I think we're talking before the show.
Oh, you think?
Yeah. You've also had a very unconventional path towards your approach to health and healthcare and how to help people be healthier. And just curious as far as like what got you down that rabbit hole. I mean, most doctors just jump out of school, they go to residency, they work for a hospital, and they just do that and get wrapped up in this whole mindset of having to see so many patients to bill insurance and giving them prescription medications to treat a disease and a symptom, not necessarily the actual whole person. So I'm just curious as far as like how you got into this path you're on now.
I mean, it really goes pretty far back in my life to fifth grade. I was like this little, fifth grade girl in a Christian school. And I remember thinking when I discovered that like there were kids in Africa that were like going hungry, I was just like, wait, this makes no sense. Like I get to go to bed every night, comforted by my parents with a, beautiful meal and all these people in the world don't. Like, why is there just so much inequality? And I was so blown away by how much suffering was in the world. I kind of woke up in fifth grade. It was a really weird experience. And so I was like trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life because I knew I had to make some sort of difference. And there was this homework assignment and they were like, what do you want to do when you're older? And I'm like, Mom, I'm really struggling. I don't know what am I here to do. And she's like, Molly, you're in fifth grade. You don't have to figure this out right now. And I was like, but I've got this homework assignment and I think maybe I should become a nurse. And she's like, well, why wouldn't you become a doctor? And I was like, oh, wait, I can be a doctor? That's cool. I want to do that. And because I wasn't sure you could be a doctor in fifth grade as a woman. I actually thought that only men were doctors. And so she's like, Molly, your doctor that delivered you was a female, Dr. Ali. And I was like, oh, okay, so this is cool. So I started reading Russian novels all about, kids on cancer wards and fast forward to, medical school. But, I basically spent my entire life working really, really hard to be an incredibly high achiever and to be like really good on paper. And I had multiple periods of burnout and multiple periods of recovery. And I got into medical school and I was in another phase of burnout. And excuse me, I basically realized at that point that something had to change. So I went to a psychologist and he was like, you're not crazy. You're not depressed. You're not anxious. You're just not taking good care of yourself. And you're a stressed out medical student and your lifestyle needs some work. And I was like, what do you mean? This is all on me. This is all my responsibility. And he's like, yeah. I was like, and honestly, that psychologist gave me a massive gift that year, because he basically told me that my condition that I was in was self-induced. And he was correct. Like, medical school is stressful, but plenty of students do it just fine. And I wasn't doing it right. I was not exercising. I was sedentary. I was drinking cups of espresso. I wasn't sleeping well. I wasn't eating normal meal times. I was a little bit under eating. I was, constantly in front of the computer. And I didn't connect with my friends or family enough because I was just sacrificing everything for the grades. And I wasn't even doing that well. I was doing pretty average. So I said, okay, if this isn't working and I'm not happy and I don't want to quit, then what else should I do? So I changed my lifestyle. I started doing yoga. I started exercising. I started meditating. I started doing Qigong. I taught myself Tai Chi from a book. I was like doing whatever it took to change. And all of the lifestyle changes that I implemented started working fairly quickly. And I started doing better in school. I started getting outstanding grades. I started, doing research over the summer with a sleep medicine doctor. And I was also studying for my board exam. And when I got my board exam score back, it was my second board exam. And it was literally, I went from an average on my step 1 to a 99th percentile on my step 2. And everybody at the school was kind of like, we don't normally see this kind of jump. Like, this is really impressive. What did you do? And I was like, well, I didn't cheat, but I changed my lifestyle and I started doing better. And they're all like, what do you mean you changed your lifestyle? I'm like, you know what? I should just teach you guys this. So I went to the family medicine department and I started creating a course called Physician Heal Thyself, Evidence-Based Lifestyle. And it became a course in the course catalog, and any student could take it. And it was a huge success. And I recruited all these doctors to teach all of these topics that we weren't taught in medical school. We weren't taught about sleep. We weren't taught about exercise. We weren't taught about relationships. We weren't taught about burnout. We weren't taught about osteopathy, manipulation. We weren't taught about nutrition and food as medicine and functional medicine. And I just thought that these were important. So I ended up having this course created, and it was really life-changing for me. But then I got to residency and I was working on a pediatric cancer ward. And I remember thinking there's something seriously wrong with the system, because we're feeding all these kids cake and candy, and they're like, they have cancer. That's what you feed cancer if you were to want to make it grow. So I just constantly butted heads with the department, and I really I felt like the black sheep, honestly, of my program. And I was pretty miserable again. And I was like, okay, well, I'm back where I started. I'm overstressed. I'm not able to maintain the lifestyle that's necessary for optimal health. And I'm literally watching doctors around me get sick. I'm literally seeing doctors with like lymph nodes popping out of their arms. And they look physically ill, and they're fighting with each other constantly about power. And I just thought to myself, God, I'm going to have to wait 20 years before I have any power or authority to change the system. So about halfway through my residency, I dropped out. I resigned, and I got a job working for a tech company funded by Peter Thiel. And I started learning about all these different doctors in Silicon Valley who were doing things differently, were practicing medicine differently. They were either concierge doctors, or they were really focused on optimizing health, or they were focused on the mind-body connection, or they were focused on building systems to optimize health using artificial intelligence. And I just fell in love with these like new models and paradigms that were, being made by these independent physicians. And I realized that I could do the same. So I basically decided to build a practice that was dedicated to optimizing health, and also working with tech companies to build new products and services to improve people's health. And here I am today doing exactly that. And, really, discovering that there's a lot more doctors like me now. There's actually a bunch of other doctors I know that left their residencies and started new companies and started new products and are really creating a new paradigm of medicine. And it's really related to health span, which is how do we extend the number of years we live healthy without disease or disability? And how do we improve the human condition?
Yeah. I mean, there's such a journey on this stuff. And you clearly started a long time ago when you were 5. I started a long time ago as well. And like, I think that term health span is, for so many people who probably listen to this podcast, it's like, even that term, maybe they've heard a couple of times before, but the understanding of what goes into that, I think for someone like me or you, is like very intuitive at this point. We're going to have to like consciously be aware of what we're saying. And maybe the difference between lifespan and health span is something that, we've been obsessed with. For example, lifespan in this country for as long as I can remember. And we see it in, time of COVID, where everything's just optimized to have people who are extremely old not die today or tomorrow, and it's,
yep.
While we're doing that, we don't care at all. Like all this attention towards COVID, like, yes, it's an infectious disease and we should limit it if we can. We need to do whatever we can to stop that. I'm not diminishing that at all, but to not look at and say like, okay, we're putting this much effort here to basically prevent 80-year-olds. And yes, there's some other people dying as well, but like bulk of people, but we don't care about how anybody else while they're alive is like how their reality is as far as how they're experiencing their life via their health. And it's like, it's the first thing to go, like with both physical health, mental health, et cetera, is like, this is the lens through which you experience reality. And this is kind of like, maybe started to already sound pretty spiritual and out there, but that's why I think it's so important. And like, you have even people like Elon Musk saying like, okay, we're gonna do this crazy stuff, get to Mars. Like, I totally believe in all of these things, people who are taking really big swings, but in my view, as far as like how I focus my time in my life, it's just, okay, if we do that and we, become a multiplanetary species, but we follow the chronic disease curve that we're on currently, we're all going to have a miserable experience. Everybody's going to treat each other like shit. We see that currently. Everyone's going to be in physical pain, be in emotional pain, die from really awful causes from chronic diseases, be on medications their whole life, not be able to move their bodies, not have good relationships, not have good sleep, never feel rested. I mean, this is what I care about. And I think plenty of people would probably, if they could feel what it feels like one day to be like an optimal human, how a human should feel versus one day with like probably the average American who's on several prescription medications, has joint pain, has terrible relationships, doesn't feel fulfilled. Like that contrast of say, okay, you can have 10 less years of life if you feel this good day to day. I guarantee you the vast majority of people would take that over trying to extend their life into this miserable existence. This is kind of like, I mean, I think about this stuff a lot as well. And it's like, there's so many ways to attack this problem. There's so many ways.
Yeah.
And this is where like, I find it fascinating, but also very complex of like, what's the biggest wedge to sort of like get people back on track to how we used to live our entire existence as humans.
Yeah. I mean, it's really, really hard to say, but the one thing that I know for sure is that a lot of the research suggests that it's our close personal relationships that really define the quality of our life, and the quality and the real goal is to have a high quality of life for as long as possible. And so, there's the idea of health span is really about really extending the number of years you have healthy, but compressing morbidity to the end of life. Just like the centenarians have, they still get diseases of aging. They just get it at the very end of their life. And they have way, way, way more healthy years. I mean, that's what everybody should want, right? And what does that mean to even be healthy? It's the ability to adapt and self-manage in the face of adversity. It's like you're getting hit with something really stressful and you're bouncing back. You're resilient. You're mobile. You're not frail. You're not sarcopenic. You're not falling apart. You're not in our nursing home dependent on others. You're independent. You can like travel the world. You can live your life. You can do what you want. Like what people don't realize is that with better health, you get more out of life. You get more mobility. You get more power and energy to pursue your purpose. And frankly, I personally feel like you get a better day to day. Like when I eat really healthy food, I just feel amazing. When I eat unhealthy food, I don't feel good. And that's why I try not to eat it. And so it's like, it's really interesting to me that like so many people will just shortchange their life by eating cheap, crappy food that's not nourishing at all, not moving their bodies, sitting in front of television, being zombies all day long, and like stressing out about things that really aren't in their control. And so their quality of life just sucks and their health starts to degrade. Before you know it, they're full of all these diseases. And it's just like, it's sad because we kind of reward these like lifestyles that are genuinely damaging to health. And we reward companies with all this money to do things to people that really aren't enhancing their quality of life at all. It's just these short-term pleasurable gains from, buying lottery tickets or watching television or clicking on the Instagram, likes and all the things that just are these short-term wins that we somehow reward as a society, rather than focusing on, how do we create culture that enhances health and that encourages people to care about the long-term health of their lives and their bodies.
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that we're the only thing that's living on this planet that we're aware of that has to think about health as something to manage says a lot.
I know.
It's like,
Yeah.
like there's entire industries around it where it's like no other species, nothing else living. Like it's like, if you look outside and you see a squirrel walking around, that's like, can't walk, that's 3 times the size as one and coughing, you'd be like, what the hell happened? Like you look around the environment and go, what is going on that made that happen? And like we have a society and just a structure of living now that I think people like have such a recency thing of like they can't really see to the past very clearly because they just know what the reality is. And it's so simple in my mind of what it takes to be healthy. Yet it's so hard and so complex to actually live that out in a modern environment. And I think that that's kind of like the thing I think of most, like how to get people back as effortlessly as possible to this thing. It's like you just mentioned, relationships are incredibly important. So like, this is just a very simple thing.
Families, communities.
Have a family and community and belonging. And like, I'm sure we could dive into that endlessly, but in a world where everybody has to work jobs they don't like, away from their families for all the time, and then come back exhausted because they don't feel good physically or mentally. Have maybe an hour a day to spend with the people they actually like and care about. Like how you expect somebody to have any sort of meaningful connections when that's their Monday through Friday, 50 weeks a year.
Yeah, I totally get that. And honestly, it's this really big question we have, right? Like the thing is I don't know if we're going to be able to solve that immediately, but we just performed one of the biggest experiments of universal basic income. And so there's a lot of information that's coming out of just what happens when you hand out money and what happens to people's, I don't know what the answer is, but I'm very, very curious to know like what would happen if we just raised the living standard for everyone. And would that encourage people to work as much? Would that encourage people to work less? Would working less be beneficial to people's health? A lot of the Scandinavian countries seems to suggest that. I mean, they give maternity leave. They give like many weeks of maternity and paternity leave. And, I really do believe the earliest years of a child's life are really important and parents need to be around their kids. Yeah. I mean, so,
sort of like my hypothesis around like a UBI is, in countries where they've done some tests and it's worked, that happens because these countries value things like community and meaning and purpose. And I think that it would frankly destroy a country like the US, which, I guess you could sort of like ask yourself the question, is that a bad thing? I think like,
I don't know if it would destroy. I don't know. To be honest with you, I really challenge that because I look at human flourishing from this perspective of like thinking about a garden that's growing and flourishing and producing. When people are flourishing and people are happy, they actually act a lot less selfishly. They actually care a lot about what's going on around them. And the problem with American culture, to be entirely honest with you, is that we're so egocentric. We are literally so focused on our individualism and on how much this, like we glorify just individual success, that we're forgetting about how important it is to not just succeed on your own, but like, what about your entire community succeeding? Like if San Francisco was one of the most successful cities in the country and one of the most expensive ones to live in, and became very, very unhealthy. And it was not a flourishing city because there was literally so many people in the street suffering around the people that were making all this wealth. And there wasn't a care for what was going on around people. So I really believe that if everybody gets to flourish and everybody could probably produce more and people would be a lot happier in the process. So like, that's just my hypothesis, but I really think that it's something to consider. I would love just looking at nature.
I'd love to be as optimistic, but I think that seeing our culture and how much we value short dopamine hits and like how, even in COVID, when people had this time to connect with friends and family, how much more time people were spending on social media and how much more we're baking and like doing comfort foods and like people,
I know
we have a culture that's set up, like you said, where these corporations are benefiting from selling people quick hits of dopamine and feeling comfort and not going through this transition. Like we would need to have a shift of some degree to get people off of that. And then this is where like, I just don't think that as a culture, we would be able to handle that very well, given our sort of like, we got all the good stuff and all the bad stuff of capitalism. Anytime we're involved in health, mental health or physical health, like we have these negative externalities that I think would be too much gravity to have any sort of escape velocity be generated through
Well,
EI. But
so that's why I'm really confident about psychedelics as medicine being a huge force of change in the country. Most people who experience a psychedelic experience recognize that it's really not about you anymore. It's about you basically experience unity consciousness. And when you've finally gotten outside of your ego and you actually feel what it's like to feel like you're not stuck in this delusion of your separate self, it can actually change the way that you relate to society. It can change the way that you relate to the world. When you actually start to feel what's going on around you, you're more sensitive to what's happening in your community. And for me, it actually is what kind of drove me out of San Francisco because I kind of noticed like I couldn't ignore what was happening in the street anymore. And I realized that like what I really needed was to be around family and community and to be, to feel connected to people. That was just my own personal story, but like, I recently visited Austin and I was able to interact with like an incredible community of like-minded people. And I was like, oh my God, this is what I've been craving this whole time. Like, it's been really fun for me to be around my family during this, actually this epidemic has not been fun, but to be around my family has been really joyful in some cases. But to see people my own age again and hanging out in community in Austin, I was like, this is literally what I need. And this is what everybody needs. It's like, we need connection. We really need to connect with each other. We need to get away from this like isolated, alone living situation. Like we really need our clans, our tribes, if we're going to fully flourish. And we also need to kind of come together and if we're going to raise children in community, we need to figure out what are our shared values. What do we all want to see the world look like? And that's one of the biggest concerning things I have about America right now is the clash of values. There's very, very honestly, there's so much confusion about right and wrong these days. And it's like, there's so much confusion about what to trust in the media. There's so much confusion about who to trust, what institutions to trust, how do you even make sense of the information that's being sent out through the media, that like, I think a lot of people are feeling really lost. And I think the real question is how do we return to some sort of bedrock of like normalcy of like, this is the way that a human should treat another human.
Yeah. I think about finding, like, I always try to find like foundational truths in a lot of my concepts around health. I think if we just promoted those, then I think that people wouldn't be able to argue that. And so like an example of that is sort of how I think about nutrition, where my viewpoint is to say, okay, what can somebody basically not argue? And you can't argue against eating real food. So you have the spectrum of people who are at each other's throats, vegans versus carnivores and everyone in between, saying that their thing's better than either. We have 95+% of people who are eating packaged foods, refined sugars, refined oils, refined grains, feeling terrible. It's like, you guys, can't we just combine forces here and say eating real food is better than not eating real food? Like eating local is far better than eating something packaged that was made from ingredients all around the world that were refined and like engineered to make you overeat them. Like, let's just agree on that and like have some of these foundational principles around health. Like this is one of those things where people can argue, like no one wants to be unhealthy. Maybe if somebody has like a weird psychological thing where they're self-sabotaging, that's just sort of I would say that's just being mentally unhealthy, but no one would choose to be unhealthy if they had the option. And I think that creating like a new sort of paradigm around values with things that are arguable with health, I think is a good step, but how to organize that.
Well, at some point you and I are going to have to sit down and go over our worldviews together so we can form some sort of institute like, this is health. It's very simple. Eat real things, eat ingredients, like you prepare foods traditionally, avoid chemical preservatives, the problem is that common sense is so lost. Like I was in a Lyft in Peoria, Illinois, like in November of last year. And I remember looking at this woman with all this candy in her car and this like sodas. And I was like, she's like, do you want any of the candy? I'm like, no, I don't want any of your candy. She's like, why don't you want any candy? Candy's really good. I'm like, candy is poison. And she was like, what? And I'm like, yeah. And I was like, but the truth is that like, you have to really meet people where they're at. And a lot of people are just so unable to fathom that like, all the crap that's in the Skittles isn't going to harm them. And the craziest thing to me is that like people are now feeding cows leftover candy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a total business. Like all these candy companies have all this refuse that comes out of their factories, and they basically sell it to animal farms, and they have to like put in specific, it's like if it fits your macros for animals. It's crazy. And so I really do feel like people need, it needs to be a culture shift. And I think it honestly happens in places like, in LA and Austin, where people are starting to value health and value this aspirational healthy lifestyle in a way that like, frankly is attractive. And, I don't know, like, I think there's the unfortunate superficial argument that most people just care about what they look like. But the truth is when you eat really healthy, you just glow with more energy. You just look healthier. You feel better. Your brain functions better. You don't get sick as often. Sure. And, yeah, I don't know. And then the thing about, I would say we were talking about earlier about some of these foundational principles is like foundational principle number one, like you're not supposed to be alone in this world. Like nobody is supposed to live by themselves forever. Like it's really not natural for humans to be living alone. And like there would be plenty of housing for everybody if we all just shared more. It's funny to me that we think that everyone's supposed to have a home in America when really everybody's supposed to have a community. Everybody is supposed to have people around them that they care about, that they can trust, that they can turn to when they're scared. And what I've learned in my research is that loneliness is like a primitive hunger signal. And it's actually designed to get you to move towards your tribe, because it would have been very dangerous for you to be on the periphery of your community in primitive times, because you would have been more likely to be attacked by animals or other dangerous people coming along. And so it's actually really important for your own psychological safety and for your sensation of generalized safety to be able to be around people. So I know that I thrive when I'm around friends. I know that I thrive when I'm around community. I know I don't do that well alone. And it's just night and day. And I spent a bunch of time in Florida this year, isolated, because I was like working on research and teaching, and I was sick of being in Illinois. And I honestly did not find it to be the easiest experience, because I really do believe that people are designed to have family and community around them. And it's a part of our evolutionary design. Pair bonding and raising children. Pair bonding was basically evolved to enable parents to make sure their children survived, and families and familial bonding basically evolved to make sure that the whole family was able to survive if one of the family members were to die. And so if you keep on like going back towards evolutionary biology, you can start seeing these patterns of the way that we're supposed to be living that would have encouraged better health, and the way that we're living now in modern times that is antithetical to health. And when you just change and flip the switch back to our genetic design, you see your health start to flourish. And ketosis is another example of this, right? Like we didn't have all this food availability back in primitive times. And now we have food available all the time, and in amounts and macronutrient ratios that make no sense to what we're supposed to be consuming. And we're supposed to be having far more fiber and protein and far less refined carbohydrates. And we're supposed to be burning our own fat pretty regularly for fuel. And we're just not doing this because we're on the carbohydrate roller coaster constantly. So I don't know. I mean, like, I think that there's a lot that we figured out. The problem is that it hasn't gone from the bench to the bedside. And there's still just enormous amounts of people who are undereducated around these basic principles.
Yeah. I mean, I think that you said it before, but meeting people where they're at is really, really important. And that's just like, your journey started at 5, like we said. Mine was not too much, behind yours. And it's like, that's the challenging part, is like, where do people have these points of change? And I usually see it around like major life events. Either they get diagnosed with something, they have a child, they start a marriage, they end a marriage, if someone dies. These are times where I really think people can look at their lives earnestly. And I mean, you make a good point around, psychedelics as being a good jumping off point for people to sort of reevaluate themselves from the outside. And maybe we do have UBI checks, but like you said, every time you get cut one, you have to take a little dose of mushrooms or something like that and go through the integration period. But just curious as far as like how you've thought about this being sort of like, without being a Timothy Leary kind of put LSD in the water supply kind of awakening. Like,
totally.
how, I mean, we
Well, first of all,
yeah, I mean, Oregon just decriminalized and approved for therapy psilocybin. Like, I think that we're going this direction. MAPS is doing tons of good work. But curious in sort of your point of view and how this could like tactically be implemented over the next 5, 10, 20 years.
Sure. I mean, I actually started studying psychedelics in my early 20s when I was very curious about them and I'd never tried them before. And I actually read Timothy Leary's biography and I realized that the problem with Timothy Leary is that he got kicked out of Harvard and it really screwed with his self-image. And he became kind of an egomaniac around being sort of the savior to give people all of the psychedelics. And he was just like very irresponsible about it. What we now know is that psychedelics are super powerful medicines that can transform lives, but they do not come without risk. There is no free lunch when it comes to biology. There's always a risk when it comes to using any sort of substance to change your physiology. So the reality is that a lot of people now who are trying to sort of shepherd psychedelics back into modern medicine are doing so with a much more conservative perspective and frankly, a lot more research. Like there is so much research going into psychedelics right now to ensure that we don't end up with the 60s all over again. Because I know people whose lives have been damaged from excessive psychedelic use. I also know many people's lives have been completely transformed. And the difference is usually understanding the dose, the set, and the setting, and the right use cases for these medicines. There's a recent study that just came out from Johns Hopkins that a bunch of my friends actually funded, including Tim Ferriss and Dave Morin. And it was basically showing that psilocybin is about 4 times more effective than traditional SSRIs for helping with depression. And so the reality is that data needs to speak for itself. Like we know that MDMA is a breakthrough therapy by the FDA, and it was designated that because it has such an incredible effect on PTSD. It's absolutely able to cure certain cases of PTSD. Like a very large percentage of people will actually never have PTSD again. And that's not to say even about the possibility of MDMA for relationship therapy, which was why it was initially prescribed when it first came out. It was really just described to help people better relate, to help people better connect. And so many people are struggling with their relationships being taxed by the stress of COVID. And so I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to see MDMA used in these different use cases in the future. On top of that, the one thing that is legal right now is ketamine assisted therapy. And what a lot of people don't even realize about ketamine is that it's pretty much the best drug on the market for suicide. And there's been a lot of people who have basically succumbed to despair deaths due to COVID-19. And we are going to see an enormous amount of doctors suffer from PTSD and depression because of just frankly being completely shocked and burned out from the just number of deaths that are happening in hospitals. I mean, if you actually look at the numbers of people who've died in America since COVID hit, it's basically the equivalent of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the atomic bombs dropped on Japan. So when you really look at the actual like severity of what we're dealing with right now, there is going to be a lot of healthcare workers who frankly are going to be like, when this is over, they're going to need some serious time to heal. So I look at psychedelics as just really important, very valuable, very effective tools in the toolbox, but they need to be given with proper workup. You need to screen people properly. You need to be able to track people's outcomes and their symptoms. You need to make sure that people who have a predisposition to psychosis don't take them. We need to make sure that we do research on what is the proper dose for different individuals. What is the different genetic metabolisms of these medicines? I know for a fact that I metabolize psychedelics much differently than the average person. So I need way less than the average person does. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot we don't even know. So I'm kind of approaching it from a place of, what's my role in all this? Well, one of my roles is to educate people. So I started this thing called the Psychedelic News Hour on this app called Clubhouse, because I wanted to be able to go to the experts and say, will you come and talk to us about what you know best? And frankly, every week we get together with these people who are investors or entrepreneurs or researchers or psychologists or doctors or, just people who are building media And I'm really getting a really broad perspective around the movement. And what I'm hoping is going to happen is that we don't end up with the same sort of marijuana, marijuana legalization movement where it just got to be kind of messy. I'm hoping that there's a lot more structure to this, and that, essentially we see people part of this movement that and feeling like they can be safe when they're being administered these medicines. There's definitely a lot of unsafe practices that are happening right now. There's a lot of self-proclaimed shamans that are not skilled and are not actually educated, and that are kind of just haphazardly going about giving people medicines without properly dosing them and risking people's mental health and well-being in the process. So I always tell people to choose your physician, or shaman, whoever you're turning to for these medicines, choose it like you would a neurosurgeon, because you're actually performing like existential brain surgery, and you are changing the way you see the world. And what people don't realize is that when you become more, one of the things that happens with psychedelics is that there's physiological changes in the brain. There's the increased neuroplasticity. There's the disassociation from your ego. There's all sorts of things that can change physiologically, but there's also the spiritual changes that can happen to your life. And so, a lot of people don't really realize that, like, you're not supposed to dramatically change your life right after you do psychedelics. Like, you should give yourself a month to integrate and to think about what you want to do and how you want to live differently. And integration is a topic of major discussion, because it's basically, how do you transform the learnings that you've taken from your experience into your life? And a lot of that comes down to your spiritual practices. How do you connect to a greater meaning and purpose? How do you connect to, if you believe that there is a God, how do you connect to God? If you believe that there isn't a God, how do you connect to your reason for living? And these are bigger questions than just understanding molecular and cellular biology, which is why we need to be extra careful with these medicines, and we need to prepare people properly and integrate them afterwards.
So, going into spirituality route, like, how do you view that, given your background and sort of like the experiences that you've had?
Well, I actually, to be entirely honest with you, part of the reason why I did end up resigning from my residency was because I had a very, very powerful psychedelic trip that was able to show me my entire life, literally from birth to death and beyond. And when you've gone through ego death and you actually feel what it's like to not be you anymore and be like beyond the body, it really puts into perspective this life that you have.
Right.
So I realized that a lot of my decisions of how I was living were based on what other people thought I should be doing and what other people said I should be, how other people thought I should live. And I realized that, like, that was not really fair to me, because it wasn't in integrity with the way I wanted to live my life. And so I was kind of like wandering through life, like constantly seeking the next achievement and the next accomplishment in order to become a physician. And then I got to this point where I became a doctor, and I felt so sad and so just so completely sad at what I had seen happen in the healthcare system. And I really just was like, this system, it claims to be improving human health, but all I'm seeing is just fixing sickness and then kicking people out of the hospital.
You're not even fixing
half
it,
the time
managing
people's health, not actually helping people adapt and self-manage. And really, a lot of times healthcare was causing more adversity than people really were prepared for. And the thing that really I can't stand about the healthcare system is that even though it does so much good in the world, there's actually a lot of amazing stuff that it can do, like trauma and like, if you get in a car accident, like, you're a lot more likely to survive in America because we have such great trauma care. But the problem is that, like, it doesn't really like address a lot of the like deeper facets of being human that really make life challenging, which is like end of life anxiety. Like, we weren't trained in medicine to actually help people go through the process of dying. We were only trained to help the families who survived the people who died. And there was just so much emphasis on like saving people, but like not caring about the consequences of keeping them on, in the ICU for like months on end, and like post ICU syndrome and all of the rehab that had to go into it. And like, it just seemed like medicine had kind of lost its way, and like the doctor-patient relationship had really lost its way. And like, there was really this huge divide between me and a patient based on what I was able to be doing with them because of what the insurance companies told me I was able to do. So they were basically I was basically a subcontractor of an insurance company. Mm-hmm. And when you're in that position, you don't have autonomy anymore because it's your job to do what the insurance says you can do, not what you think is right for the patient. So there was these like moments of like clarity I would have when I would realize like, this isn't what medicine's supposed to be. Like, this is just what medicine's become because of the profit motive and because of, the design of the system. But the system really hasn't thought through a lot of the more important things about being human, which is like being healthy. And, like we don't really pay doctors to educate people on health. We don't really pay doctors to educate people on lifestyle and nutrition and fitness. And we just really pay doctors to prescribe meds and perform surgeries. And so everybody wants more from the healthcare system, but they're not getting it because the system is so, it's just not designed for that. So like when I think about psychedelics, when I think about spirituality, I actually think about medicine in this new worldview. And like, I kind of envision medicine in the future to be a lot more like, there's going to be the existing system, right? Like we're not going to just throw it out the window because it does things and we needed to do those things. But the thing is that I kind of see the second system emerging, and this kind of new vision kind of has come to me through years of introspection and just like searching, frankly. But I really think that there's going to be a new part of medicine that really is designed for improving health and doing it from a holistic perspective, from the mind, body, and the spirit. So the body, like really enhancing human health from the body is really treating your body as though it truly is a temple, and not treating it like it's this, machine that can be exploited for your productivity, which is really what we've been treating our bodies like in Silicon Valley. Is like, how can I just eke out more productivity from this body? How can I just get this body to do more? And frankly, I've been part of the biohacking movement. And I think there's a shift. There needs to be a shift in biohacking away from just trying to manipulate the body for specific outcomes and more towards like really, really caring for the body in a way that like respects the longevity that you intend to have around it. So it's like investing in the body like you would invest in anything else in your life, like really building it slowly over time and carefully managing it and carefully, holding it and being respectful to it. And not harming it through lifestyles that are harmful. So like, that's one facet of the spiritual component, is really the sort of the Christian tenet of your body is a temple. I really still believe that, even though I'm not a Christian anymore. And then the sort of psychological component is really very much missing from medicine. Like, I just fundamentally believe that almost everybody would benefit from having a psychologist or some form of therapy. I mean, life is so traumatic in so many ways that like everybody would benefit from just like working through your childhood traumas, if you have them. If you don't have them, working through your relationship traumas, working through your work-related traumas, like working through all of the things in life that have hurt you, and really integrating those painful experiences and moving through them and not resisting them or shoving them under the rug. Psychology and spirituality are sort of hand in hand as well, because the spiritual component is really about like, why do you even want to be healthy? What is the purpose of health in the first place? And for me, the purpose of health really comes down to this vital force, there's energetic flow that goes through our bodies that basically animates us. That's really the difference between us being alive and dead. That I believe the seat of this vital energy, this vital flow, this chi, whatever you want to call it, is the mitochondria. So really, when we think about mitochondrial function, we need to be thinking about how is health a facet of capacity. So when you're really healthy, you have more capacity to be able to handle and weather any challenge that your body is faced with. And this capacity comes from our capacitance. I believe, this is my personal belief, and a lot of other doctors believe this, but scientists, but anybody who studies mitochondria and really sort of searching for the meaning of life these days through the uniting of Western and Eastern belief systems around health, understands that when you really have healthy mitochondria, you have more capacitance, you have more charge, you have more energy capable to being deployed for whatever it is that you decide to put your energy towards, which may be raising children or working to build a company or working at a job that's really meaningful to you, or even just maybe you're retired and you want to travel the world, you want to adventure. Like, to me, health and capacity are hand in hand. And the thing is that one of the biggest drains of our capacity is not having meaning or purpose, not feeling like our lives have any reason behind them, not understanding why we're here. And so this existential facet of medicine, I think, is deeply intertwined with the psychological and the physical, because when we are psychologically stressed, we drain our energy. We actually are using our capacity. We're using our reserves. When we're physically stressed, we're using our reserves. And if you can manage your metabolism, if you can manage your thoughts, if you can basically find meaningful pursuits in life, and then that's when you really start to flourish, because that's when you actually have a reason to get out of bed in the morning and to go out and do something that really matters.
Yeah. I mean, I've been through these situations before too. Like the current of life is so just will take you away from where you thought you were, and you will just be hitting rocks, slamming your face, drowning. And then until you have some of these experiences, and sometimes long meditation trips can do this, long forms of therapy, psychedelics, et cetera. You can finally stand on the banks and be like, oh shit, I was just being pummeled in this crazy rapids of life. And it's so easy to just keep going down that route and getting so burned out and just sort of giving up and sort of saying, okay, this is just how it has to be. And I've personally felt the extreme difference about what you're talking about, having a purpose and not having a purpose. And I think that people don't talk about often is that purpose can change 100%.
Yes.
It's like an evolving thing. So I think what happens is I went down this path, had my clinics, was in practice, and that ended up being extreme, just not my path anymore, unfulfilling, burned me out. I switched 100%, but so many people are like, well, this is what I wanted to do since I was really young. And then I did this. I invested so much in my identity, and ego was wrapped into this, being comfortable with yourself, that your purpose or how you envision that happening throughout your life can and will change. Some people stick to it for their whole life. And if that's the case and you never switch, that's fine too. But I think that's more common now, especially with the opportunities that we have as humans now versus, my parents' generation. They grew up in a very small town in Minnesota, and they didn't have opportunities that can change their sort of view on the world and what's possible and how they can fit into the world. And I think that now that we have an endless amount of opportunity, you can move to whatever city you want pretty much in the world and do whatever you want work-wise via the internet, connect with whoever. Your opportunities in the world are just vast and can change. And so just having a regular check-in point with, I think this, just even though like you said, our medical system is not set up appropriately for taking care of people, people still think, oh, I should go get my annual checkup or something like that. We don't do that with mental health. We don't do that with, sort of your purpose or how you approach life or what's important to you, what relationships you want to be in, any sort of how do I exist in the world around me? And I think that is a huge problem. And I think that, the part of what's so great about psychedelics is that you have no choice but to go through that exercise. I have sort of a monthly, quarterly, yearly review protocol where I have a lot of these hard questions that I ask myself to make sure that I'm on the right track and being honest with myself. But I think a lot of people, you were wired for achievement and success when you were younger. I was the same exact way. And they our brains just work that way. For a lot of people, they don't have history of operating like that for decades at a time. So it's really challenging to get out of their own way and ask these hard questions and be very systematic about it. And I think that therapy can be great. A community can be great, but there's the more often we can get people to sort of have these points where they figure out where they're at and if it's truly what serves them. You've never done that. This may sound crazy to you, but it's possible. Take time, reevaluate, and start over if you need to.
I totally agree with that. And I think that one of the points that I really didn't finish earlier was if there was a way for there to be healthcare that really cared about people, what would that look like? What would that experience look like? And to me, it's the healthcare experience wouldn't feel clinical. It would feel far more spiritual. It would feel far more like you're entering a place of a holy place rather than a place that feels like cold and, like sterile, like I feel like a healing environment should feel like it heals you. Right. So once COVID's over, I totally intend to build like an actual physical space, because I really feel like people need to see what's possible. And I've kind of always been this like telemedicine doctor, really. I've always met with my patients initially, but then I didn't have a clinic because I was always working directly with individuals. But now that I'm thinking about like, what does the future look like? I mean, I really envision that like, if you're going to have a psychedelic experience, it should be worth every penny that you pay. Like you should go into it just kind of feel like when you buy a new iPhone and you're like, yeah, this is worth like $1,000. Like you should feel like that when you get into modern healthcare. Like the newer healthcare should actually have such an incredible ROI attached to it that like you don't feel bad paying for it because you feel like you've got your money's worth. So I feel like the experience should feel warm. It should feel sacred. It should feel connected. You should feel cared for. You should be able to call your healthcare system whenever you need to. Just like you can call Apple whenever your computer breaks, right? Like you should feel connected and supported by the system. And, I really think that like group psychedelic experiences are coming. I think that there's no reason why we won't be able to give people medicine in community and have people integrate in community. And it may be one of the only ways we're able to actually scale this medicine is if we are able to give people experiences that enable them to heal together rather than apart. And there's clinics like Polaris in San Francisco that are already doing this, which is pretty exciting. So it's coming. It's just very, very carefully and slowly being deployed because of the risks associated with, there's definitely a lot of risks associated with like the seeing psychedelics get a little bit too used maybe over judiciously.
Right.
Like we really want to we want to properly use them carefully with people.
Yeah. I mean, what are they using? Ketamine, or how is their approach?
Yeah. I mean, ketamine is right now, like there's a lot of great ketamine doctors, and I'm actually a part of a Google group that's a bunch of amazing ketamine physicians that actually really care about the spiritual component of this medicine. But then there's also quite a lot of just pain clinics in the country that are just shooting people up with ketamine, kind of leaving them in the clinical room and then like coming back in when they're done. And it's just designed really to get people off the edge of chronic pain or killing themselves. I mean, ketamine is a potent drug for suicide. I mean, it really does pull you out of that mentality. But the problem is that a lot of these clinics aren't properly integrating people. They're not requiring psychotherapy attached. I really think that these medicines really are designed to be given with the therapeutic sort of triad of a doctor, a patient, and a therapist, and not necessarily with just the person getting the shot of the medicine. And that's what I'm seeing in some cases in the country. But, I mean, I think most doctors are doing the best they can. It's just, I think that ideally what we'll see is the clinics that will succeed are the ones that have more holistic care and care about the whole person.
Yeah. So you're going to come to Austin and open up this dream facility, or what?
I really want to, honestly. I think Austin's the next spot for me. I'm pretty sure. So, it's just the hard part is right now there's all these cities that are locking down, and I'm very concerned that like we're all gonna. I mean, I'm really like crossing my fingers that we're not going to be in another quarantine soon. But as soon as I can, I'm going to try to get down there and start building my own community there. And I've got friends there, and enough friends there that it feels like it'll be a pretty soft landing. And I think that the health community in Austin is pretty world class. So I'm stoked.
Yeah. What is your recent sort of analysis of the COVID situation, given that, we have obviously far more cases than we ever have, and we're in this crazy growth of that, but deaths are flatlined, if not decreasing in majority of places. How do you think about that?
Well, I mean, okay. So I get this report every day from this guy, Jack, who is a super smart dude. He owns like a bank or something. And he was on the board of this company that my friend started. And so I got to know him through these reports, and he basically goes through all of this research every single day and publishes a really, really comprehensive report that's filled with all sorts of data. And so it's like, I'm talking hardcore math, right? Like empiric data from every direction, from all the institutes all over the world. I mean, it's really like if you were to work in the CIA and be getting intelligence reports, it's like that. So I feel like I have a different perspective than the average person because my data is so much better than the average person. But to be entirely honest with you, I'm not very excited about the reality we're in right now. A lot of hospitals capacity has gone up 30% in the last 2 weeks. So that's a pretty significant jump. And we're actually at higher rates than we were in the summer and in March. So I'm looking at the whole world right now and I'm saying, look, if England, France, and Germany are all quarantining again, I would not be surprised if we're next. Now, the question is are people going to comply? They're closing all the restaurants in parts of California. They're closing all the restaurants, indoor eating in Illinois. Like, to me, it just seems like inevitable, sadly. So I'm a big believer in masks. I think that masks are really important. At the same time, I'm also a big believer in, being really healthy first and foremost. And like the people that I was hanging out with in Austin were like exceptionally healthy individuals. And so the reality is that you need to kind of choose your Corona crew pretty wisely. And I think the smartest move would be choosing a good 10 to 20 people that you're going to hang out with over the next 2 months. And, maybe not doing as much crazy socializing as you had planned. And just being really careful with who you interact with, because the chances are you're going to get exposed at some point. And so the best defense is having a healthy immune system. And the best defense is having, proper micronutrient levels, getting your vitamin D. We're hitting winter. Vitamin D levels are dropping. If you're not taking vitamin D, that's absolutely bonkers. So I believe vitamin D, omega-3s, magnesium, N-acetylcysteine, mushrooms. Those are a few of, not to like plug my own company, but I actually designed a supplement company specifically because I was like, most people are not taking the proper supplements that they need. So there's a company called adaptive-iq.com. And like, I really just tried to create affordable supplements for people to get what I have found a ton of research on. Essentially, like there's certain substances like zinc, selenium, quercetin, green tea extract that really do enhance immune function and fight infection. So I think it's important that people are on a proper supplement regimen, that people are exercising regularly, that people are getting enough sleep, that people are, if you're stressing out like I have been in the last few months, get a psychologist. It's been game-changing for me to have a psychologist to talk to. Spending time with your family and your friends and your loved ones, like really connecting with people, connecting with nature, connecting with your purpose, spending this time over winter to kind of go inward and just examine the parts of your life that need some changing. Create some real resolutions that you can stick with. I'm actually about to go do a coffee cleanse where I'm going off of coffee over the next 2 weeks because my body is basically telling me that I need to stop drinking so much coffee. So I've cut back to about a cup a day, but I'm about to go off and I'm really nervous. But I mean, this is the perfect time.
You'll do just fine.
I know. I tried to go off and then I got headaches and then I was like, I think I can do this slower. Right. So I've been slowly weaning off. And I haven't been getting headaches. And in fact, I'm feeling better every day. So I think that COVID, there's a lot of conspiracy theories. There's a lot of people who are just like freaking out about all of these weird ideas. But the truth is that this is not the first pandemic we've ever seen. The Spanish flu was not that long ago. People were arguing about masks during the Spanish flu. They were arguing about their rights being taken away. They were arguing about all sorts of stuff. And the truth is that we're just reliving history. Like this is not a new experience. This is a novel virus, but it's not like we've never seen a pandemic before. Mm-hmm. So I just think that a lot of people need to use common sense. If it's a respiratory virus, avoid being around crowds of people, wash your hands, wear masks, do the basics, like do the things that we know enhance immune function. And, get as many fruits and vegetables in your diet that are, I mean, I'm a big believer in colorful fruits and vegetables and getting proper protein intake for proper immune system function. I think that's our genetic, we're really designed to have that kind of nutrition, I think personally. So take a look at your sugar consumption. I mean, so many people are over consuming sugar. That's a huge issue right now for people who are using sugar as a drug. They're using it to feel better. And it's not making them healthier, it's making them sicker. So I'm also an advisor of a company called Levels. And so I'm a big believer of wearing glucose monitors to measure your blood sugar in real time and see what those, banana breads and those pies are doing to your body. And really get use this time that you have to go inwardly and start analyzing your health. Start looking at your stress levels. I prescribe leaf therapeutic devices for a lot of my clients to get insight into how much stress they're under. And it really gives them the ability to use biofeedback to change their stress levels through breathing and through different stress interventions. So I'm pulling out sort of all of the tools I have in my toolbox to gear up for winter. And stoicism has been hugely helpful for me over the last few months, just realizing like what I have control over and what I don't.
Yeah, it's just, there's not much that changes in my mind. If you want to be healthy, you just do the same things.
Yeah.
You just,
but a lot of people aren't doing any of those. Let's get real.
Of course. Yeah. And we don't have a government that endorses anything to be healthy. It's like, I think that's what some people get frustrated about, is that we have clear evidence that, you talk about vitamin D levels, things like this. And there's no talk about that. We just say, wear more masks, stay inside. And
well, you know why that is? It's because there's not enough money in lobbying to make health something worth, political work. Like the thing is, I lobbied for healthcare reform in DC for the American Medical Association and the American College of Physicians when I was in medical school. And I was just disgusted by how politics is just fundamentally run by the profit motive. And so we need to figure out, who are these food companies? Who are these health companies? Who are these tech companies that are promoting health? How do we band them together and create a political, lobbying group and go to DC and bring these people these devices, bring these politicians these tools, bring these people these foods, and show them that firsthand, if you change your own health, you'll want to change the health of your constituents. So, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the health world. And I think both of us are on this path. And, I'm so glad to have been on this podcast today, because now I know that, there's another ally out there that I have that can help fight this fight, because it's going to be up to us to figure out the future. We're really designing the future. It's our generation that's going to make the difference here.
Yeah. It's every one warrior that we get for the good fight is always appreciated. Molly, thanks for joining me today. I think we could go for hours about this stuff. So
I know.
Appreciate you taking the time, your busy schedule, to hop on. Where can people find all of your work?
Sure. The best place is drmolly.co, drmolly.co, or at drmolly.co on Instagram. I'm on Instagram every day, mostly because it's how I connect with my audience. And I actually feel like it's brought me a lot of connection through all of this. I also have an email, mmaloof at either gmail.com, drmolly.co, or stanford.edu. So I have got many options to contact me. Happy to join other people's podcasts. And I'm a huge promoter of new products and services. I'm actually a Perfect Keto affiliate. So I will be, I definitely believe that, it's really important to promote products that really make people healthier. And I really want to thank you for creating that amazing company, because you guys make great products.
I appreciate it. All right, Molly, thanks again.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Natural State Podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, I'd really appreciate you heading over to whatever service you're listening to this podcast on, dropping me a 5-star review and your thoughts on the show. This helps us get discovered by more people and spreading the good gospel of health. And if you want to stay plugged into all of my self-health experiments, recent research and books that I'm reading and my interpretations of those things, products that I'm testing, and thoughts on all things related to health, check out my free weekly newsletter called The Feed. You can sign up for that at dranthonygustin.com/thefeed. That's dranthonygustin.com/thefeed. Thanks again for tuning in your support of the Natural State Podcast.